Hi, welcome to Fiberchats. My name is Irina. I'm the host here. And my guest today, with whom I already spent an hour chatting just because I love this woman, Susan Anderson. Welcome to my channel.
Thank you very much. It's just wonderful to be here. Yes, we thought we better record before we just carried on.
Right. So I got these two magazines from you. And I must tell you, like for the past months, I've been studying them. It's not just a reading that like you would look through just leaf through it and like see a couple pictures. Each article grabs my attention. I had to like read from start to finish. I mean, the patterns that you put there are absolutely beautiful, and they're for different levels of knitters and crocheters. There's patterns for both, for knitters and crocheters. And I love the variety of articles there. There are some historical articles. There are articles about art. There are articles about yarn mills, the wool mills. There are articles about yarn dyers. There are articles about farmers, about different breeds of sheep. I mean, I've learned so much from just these two magazines. Tell me how you came up with the idea to start this magazine.
Well, it took me a good few years. I knew I wanted to do something to do with knitting, so that I could call myself well, not a professional knitter so much as somebody who knitted for work.
Right.
And I was trying so hard to think of something to do. I think so. I'm 53 now, and I started this journey seriously when I was 40. Um, and then over the years, it was through going to yarn festivals. So we used to have the Edinburgh Yarn Festival, which finished in 2019. But going to that, I realised how many people there were out there doing amazing things with fibre and wool and colour. And that's one thing I can do. I can go into a shop and just be completely inspired by the colours and what people have done putting things together. So I knew there was that aesthetic that I wanted to immerse myself with. And I also realised that whenever I wanted to find something out about Scottish textiles, I would find out just how little I knew and then how much more there was to find out. And that was realising that there's loads going on today, but also we have this industry, or used to have this industry in the country. We've got so much history in Scottish textiles and heritage today as well. So it was really bringing those ideas together.
Well, I
Yeah,
mean,
that's
like
really
to me, like when I go to like when you talk about Scottish fiber arts, right? That goes back hundreds and hundreds of years.
yeah.
There is like such a rich culture there, and if you like look historically, England and Scotland, like the wool was like one of the main industries. Like it was big amount of GDP. Like it was a huge industry, and now it's sort of becomes almost cost prohibitive to share ships. So by putting this magazine together, you're also like really helping to raise awareness of this issue and for people to understand how important it is to support the slow fashion industry.
That is a very good point. You just reminded me as well that I had some questions in my head that I wanted to have the opportunity in my working life to explore. And one of them was why, and still is, why is wool worth so little? I don't understand why that is. Maybe there's a good reason and I need to learn about it, but it just doesn't make sense to me. So yes, that and some other questions like art versus craft. Do they need to be seen as different things? Those sorts of questions actually underpin what I'm doing as well.
Well, I also notice like it's for me, it's the same thing because I feel like the longer I'm knitting, the more I understand how little I actually know and how much there is to learn, right? And when it comes to different breeds of sheep, I'm like a total novice. I know nothing. So talk to me about your exploration in that field.
Yeah, so there were two things that I wanted to do in the first issue. One was to set the scene with the history of textiles in Scotland, and the other one was to introduce the sheep breeds, knowing snippets about both, but very little. So that's why I have articles about both in issue one. And a big part of the article about the sheep breeds was I wanted to have really strong illustration, a really strong sense of illustration. So I found the illustrator, that's a story in itself, which I will tell you in a minute if you want to know it.
I do.
Excellent, just as well. So the first thing I had to do was find out, well, what is the list of native sheep breeds in Scotland? And I was introduced to Debbie Zawinski, who wrote the book In the Footsteps of Sheep. It was an absolutely wonderful book that she goes around Scotland meeting people trying to actually get fleece directly from the sheep. I mean, ideally from the fences or from the farmers, not pulling it off the sheep, obviously. And hand spinning it and then making socks from that hand spun yarn. And this book is the story of her journey and the people she meets, and then there are sock patterns in it as well. So she actually corrected my list because I had 9 sheep, which I was quite proud to get 9 out of 10 right from an expert like Debbie. And then she said, "You've forgotten the Beaumont," and I had never heard of a Beaumont sheep before. I know all about them now. So yeah, it really just was setting the scene in issue one, those two things, and then started getting into the sheep. And then you realise, just as you've said, which is so exciting, that when you start looking into something, how much more there is to find out. So there is likely to be in future issues about specific breeds of sheep. So there might be a couple of paragraphs in issue one about each breed. Well, there will be whole articles about Beaumont sheep and Castle Murets and so on.
Well, can I make a suggestion also about an article? So like one of the things that I always find fascinating when there is like woolen spun versus like I feel like
Yeah.
a lot of people who are not spinners have no idea like about plying of the yarn or how it is spun and what difference does it make and for what kind of needs you need what kind of wool and it comes with the breeds, but it's also just the spinning process, right? So I feel like something like that I would find incredibly fascinating to learn.
What a good idea. And I'm actually just thinking 3 conversations I've had with people, well, hand spinners or suppliers of spinning equipment, and the different things that they've mentioned like that. And there's 2 of them actually in particular even have suggested to me, and of course I said yes. Let's have patterns actually specifically for hand spun yarn.
That would be like brilliant.
Yeah, so if you bring in those, what would you call them, technical details or skills, and I mean, I'm assuming I've done a little bit of drop spindle spinning, but I have a lot more to learn about that one. I'm assuming that for hand spun yarn, you don't want a pattern where the gauge is the most important thing. You want to be more flexible.
Right.
Oh yes, that is such a good idea. That's a yes. I just say yes to everything, so I'm not going to run out of content.
No, that's my theory in life. Just say yes, don't stress,
and then make it happen.
Right. Well, I mean, I find like that a lot of knitters are just they doing it for fun, right? Like they just come to the store, they see some pretty color, they touch some squishy soft yarn, and they thinking like, okay, I'm gonna make something out of it. And I think the more I'm doing it, the more I learn that like different breeds have different best uses, right? So like some breeds are more like if you touch it, it's not necessarily soft and squishy, it can be like more robust, but it would hold the shape much better for like a sweater. Whereas if you use alpaca, it's just gonna sag, So like I think like there is definitely room for educating people about using different breeds. And it's also in a way, if people only know merino wool, right, and they only use that, we're not helping all the other breeds to stay on this planet. And diversity in anything is beautiful, and diversity in breeds of sheep is crucial. And there are so many breeds that on the verge of extinction. And I know that in Scotland, there is actually an organization who keeps track of the sheep
yes,
that
the rare breed Preservation Society.
Right.
Yes.
I actually interviewed the felting artist who make that her mission in life to felt those sheep that on
Wow.
the risking extinction to like raise awareness. So,
That sounds like the subject of a future article as well.
right.
Yes.
Tell me about how you decide what kind of articles you're gonna put in the magazine. Like, do they find you or do you look for them? How does that happen? Or is it 50-50 kind of situation?
It's probably 50-50. So I have a big list that I maintain, and that yeah, it's not even that organized, but I have a list that I just keep adding to. Um, but for example, one of the articles that's going to be in issue 4 came from a meeting that I just went along with actually Lindsay Roberts from the Border Tart. I just went with her to a meeting, and that is going to be an article because it's all what you a lot of what you do, isn't it? Is you start speaking to people and you understand the stories and the history behind what they're doing. I think that is just so interesting. But what I like to try to do is have a vague theme in each issue. So issue 3 is linen, but it's not necessarily dominant. So for example, in issue 2, there's a couple of articles about tartan. And that came about, that was opportunistic, or an opportunity rather, because I was invited to be a vendor at a little yarn show that we had last year. It was just a one-off at Bannockburn House
Mhm.
called Bannock Yarn. And just because of that, I realised and then started hearing that it was the 200th anniversary of George IV visiting Edinburgh, which was really the birth of tartan, or modern tartan anyway. So that then led to these couple of articles. But I'm really, really lucky and delighted because one of the things that I thoroughly enjoy doing and getting so much joy from is meeting people in this fabulous fibre world. I'm delighted that people are actually approaching me with ideas for articles as well. So they might have just done some research, whether they're an academic or whether it's just personal research, something they're interested in, and asking if I'm interested and want to share it. And in fact, I can't think of anything or any subject that people have approached me with so far that I've said no to, because it's just all so interesting.
Right. Well, tell me what was different between the first issue and the second issue? Like, what did you learn from the whole ordeal of putting together the very first publication, and how did the second one differ?
That's a really good question, actually, and my layout designer would definitely answer that. Um, so I worked with this fabulous lady, Nikki Regan, who she's a, what would they call them? Who were the people who used to physically lay out text for like
Right.
newspapers and magazines? Lithograph?
Yeah,
Is it
yeah.
lithograph? So she started out with that, and now she uses all the technology for graphic design. But the biggest thing I learned actually the hard way was that what I gave to Nikki had to be perfect. There was absolutely no point giving her drafts of things, because if she had an article or she didn't have the high resolution picture, she would just have to go and redo it once I gave her the final version. When I started out thinking that she would want to be kept up to date, therefore see drafts, but no, actually, yeah. But I think another huge lesson has been, and I suppose it's like starting out any new enterprise or any new thing, hobby or whatever, is you learn that you learn people that you want to keep working with,
Right.
and the people that you connect with and relate to, and then you just somehow manage to get stuff done, and you manage to get it done in a hopefully as low stress way as possible, but to as high quality as possible.
I mean, is
So
that possible to keep the stress low when you're doing something that's totally new for you? And
well, yes, you're absolutely no, it wasn't possible at all. Um, but luckily, so because of my background, which is financial services, working in banks mainly, I worked on projects, mainly technology projects, where you have to listen, you have to understand requirements, and then you have to find solutions to those.
Right.
So that was really the transferable skill. And then project management. So what are we aiming for? And then working back to how do I deliver that in time, although I still managed to be late, but never mind. It's out there now. Yeah, so those types of things. But the other thing was, as well as trusting people, you learning about who to work with and who you want to carry on working with, was tech editing. That was a massive thing. So Emily Williams, who's Flutterby Knits,
Yeah.
she's based out near Inverness, you probably know. Oh, she's amazing. She was actually one of the first designers that I reached out to see if she'd be interested in having a design in the first issue. And it was a Zoom call with her where she asked me all these questions about tech editing, really. And I had vaguely thought about it, of course, completely underestimated what was involved in it. Yes, so the amount of time and effort that's taken, but now the way it is happening, which I am really enjoying, is I'm a lot more involved in it than I had been, because I was trying not to step on the tech editor's toes and be too involved. But actually, it's more fun if you just work together.
Well, let me ask you about that, because it's your baby. It's your idea. You putting your name at the end of the line, right? Is it difficult to let go? Is it difficult to let other people make decisions on their part?
That's a good question as well. It's a balance, I think, because I do have actually a really clear vision of what this thing looks and feels like, and I suppose how I want people to feel and think about it. But I also love, particularly with the contributors in terms of the articles and the designers, I love giving them some input and then not interfering.
Right.
Or what I would see as interfering, because I love to be able to see what people come up with. Which reminds me, another lesson actually from issue 1 was things like having a style sheet for a pattern that you're going to publish, so getting all that consistency. But the learning was less the consistency and more the fact that you need to explain to people that you're printing something, and therefore that design needs to be able to fit in a certain number of pages. I mean, I wouldn't necessarily specify it must be 6 pages, but it shouldn't be 24.
Right. And I know that this is like a problem with a lot of publications, because like usually when a person publishes design on their Ravelry, right, or their like website, they have complete freedom of publishing one design as a whole book. But when it comes to book printing or magazine printing, like there is limited amount of space. Who decides on like what has to stay in the pattern and what has to go?
Yeah, well, yeah. So it's a balance again. We try so hard, and the we that I'm talking about is myself and tech editor. So try so hard. So that this jumper I'm wearing actually is the Droman, which was in issue 2. The pattern's 18 pages long,
right?
But there was absolutely no question that we were going to reduce the number of sizes, for example, to reduce the page count, because pattern is just so special. Just love it. But I had to take the decision. One of the patterns in issue 3, we've taken off a couple of the sizes that would have been there. I think what we're going to do is actually have those available separately, so they'll be available in the digital version that comes with the printed run anyway.
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah, and it's so annoying on one hand, but on the other hand, it's the sheer practicality of having to print another 12 pages, versus this thing paying for itself and therefore being sustainable. It is that balance. But right. Yeah, so that's actually probably probably been the hardest decision that I've had to take in terms of managing page count.
Tell me about like the process, right? So you're publishing them every 6 months. Tell me, how does that break down these 6 months? Like what's happening in those 6 months?
Wow. Well, so what happens generally is, so I have, with my big list of potential articles and features, I've got them kind of linked to each other, and I've got subjects that I really want to go and find out about. I'm just thinking. So one is that, and actually, I'm sure she won't mind me saying, there's likely to be an article about Ripple's craft in issue 4. Yeah, and it's just because we keep bumping into each other at yarn shows, and I had a 30-second conversation with them about the fact that they live off grid, and I've seen pictures of the dye shed. I just really want to get up there anyway. So I've got a list of articles that will go together, like the tartan ones or the linen ones, and then like another couple of subjects that I just really would want to cover, because that's where my interest happens to be going. And then there'll be some more that I know people are researching for me. Once I've agreed with those writers, agreed with myself as well, depending on the ones I'm writing, and I'm at the same time agreeing with the designers. So I do also have a list of designs and designers that I like to use. I'm not doing open calls at the moment for designs, but through that group and meeting people like yourself, actually,
right.
What I'm trying to do is make sure I always ask, do you know somebody? Yeah, or is there anyone who's interested? And you've made a couple of fabulous suggestions. So, and it's partly because the underrepresented groups and the people who have never designed before is giving opportunities. And actually, there's a couple of first-time designers coming up. So,
absolutely love that, because like the difficulty of that there is, I mean, there's very well-known designers out there that you can find them in every magazine. And for newer designers or less known designers, it's actually like really hard to get that your foot into the door, right? And I love that you're doing that. I love that you're giving this opportunity to like new designers.
Yeah, and you want a bit of both, but partly because to sell the magazine, having some known names really helps,
right?
And also because those known names come up with, like, I think all the designers come up with amazing things,
right?
So it's getting that right balance, but also for the yarn companies. For the yarn companies to know that their yarn is being used, and actually it's not a matter to any of them, but it is an opportunity. If their yarn is being used by a well-known designer or not, but included in the magazine, it's promoting their yarn.
Right.
So it's trying to promote everybody, really. That's what it's about. It's about promoting Scottish textiles and the people that are working in it, whatever they are doing. Yeah, but should I go back to the process? That was what I was talking about before I went off on that tangent again. I have so many tangents. Yeah, so once I know what the articles are going to be, and I know what the designs are going to be, then they're really working towards 2 deadlines for each of those. So for the articles, it's having drafts of those that I'm happy with. So I'll quite often, with the contributors' permission, of course, I'll edit them first, and then they go to my editor, proofreader, who was amazing. And he actually was never worked as an academic, but through his career, he's now a professional editor and proofreader. Quality of writing is really, really important to him. He's a doctor in classics from one of the major southern universities. I mean, just having that quality. So I need to give him enough time to work his magic. And then the same with the designs, it's giving the tech editor enough time to work on it. Although we're developing a pattern where, as I said earlier, we're working much, much closer together. And then as well with the designs, it's getting the patterns in time, so that I like to make the second sample if I can. Um, Partly because I'm putting my name to it, and back to the thing about I want to be able to say I knit for work. So the second sample, which it also serves the purpose of having the design in more than one colorway in the magazine. Of course, they have to be ready for the photo shoot, so that's another.
Well, that was my
deadline.
next question. Tell me about the photography, because honestly, it's the most beautiful publication. And in terms of photography, like I just keep coming back to it to look at the beautiful pictures. It's like really beautiful quality pictures.
Oh, that's wonderful. Thank you so much. Well, a lot of that is down to the layout designer, Nikki, I mentioned earlier, because she. So with the articles, she pays a lot of attention to the text, and she matches the pictures to the text. And I hadn't even noticed, it was my sister who pointed this out to me, that she manages not just to get the subjects lined up, but you might have, so for example, the Silly Sheep Fibre Company, there's a whole page of photographs, which is the sheep. So I've given Nikki 20 photographs. She's selected a subset of those. I like to give her more than she needs because I trust her so much now. But she doesn't just match them on subject into the text. She's managing to get the tones, the colours. So it's allowing professionals to do what they're really, really good at. And talented people, as you said, they're just wonderful. And then for the photo shoot, again, a lot of that is down to Nikki. We're trying to focus on the designs, have them shine. But it's trying to have as much fun as well, so that has anyone a professional model? No, none of them are models. None of them are professional models. There's a lady, Amelie, who is also in issue 3. There's 2 or 3 people actually who are, in all 3. So Amelie and then 2 of the boys. I'm calling them boys. They're not boys at all. Men now. That they're just so remarkable, talented. So Amelie and the boys, did I say it? They are people who seem to manage to, well, I don't even know what the term is, but they just are so photogenic. That's probably the best word.
Right.
But the photographer and the styling and being quite informal about it, and you just trying to, most of what I end up doing on the photo shoot day is making teas and coffees and making sure that everybody's fed.
Did you think that's gonna happen when you plan to open magazine and start doing it?
Yeah, I did actually. But part of that is because I'm in the background, quite daunted by the photo shoot. I mean, obviously I'm a lot more experienced at it now. Right. We have a photo shoot for issue 3, and I was much more hands-on. But I still managed to make the teas and the coffees. That was very important to me. But yeah, it's my way of, I suppose, making sure that people are welcomed and they get comfortable in the room, but also that I've got my hands busy because it is quite nerve-wracking seeing these months of work and the responsibility of presenting that work on behalf of the yarn producers and the designers all come together.
Right.
And the fact that you've got these people who have given up some of their, well, it's been Sundays so far, to come along to the photo shoot and just wanting them to have a good time.
I'm sure they're having such a blast that they don't mind it at all.
No, they don't. And in fact, last time I would, people could have left, a couple of models could have left, but no, they just hung out. They were just happy. So it was nice. Yeah.
Are you afraid that, like, I'm sure when you continue this magazine, more and more designers will want to be part of it. So I'm not at all concerned about you finding the designs for the magazine. Are you concerned that you might run out of ideas for the articles?
No, absolutely not. Because every week I come across something else. And you've already, in the chat we had before we started the interview, right, you've already given me 3 ideas. and actually, the more I talk to people and the more I learn and realize how much I don't know. It's like I had an article about 10 sheep breeds in issue 1. well, that's actually probably could be 10 articles about the individual sheep breeds, spread over what will hopefully be several years as well. But there's just so much going on now. Like, I was talking to one of the Shetland lace experts, knitters, the other week, and what she was telling me about, just in terms of the techniques, and then her family history, I was like, well, when we make that two articles or one, and actually, I think it'll probably be a theme in one of the issues. So we've got the two articles together, and
My vote is for the whole magazine devoted to
Shetland. Yes, because yes, yes, good point. Oh yeah, okay. See, that's something else to talk to you about again. Share contacts.
I would absolutely love that copy in my library. But you know what? I feel like I hear you, because like you and I have a lot in common in this respect, because for me, the best thing about my channel, it's not about views, it's not about comments, even though I love all my comments. And if you guys want to comment something, write it there. But to me, it's about meeting people like you, about meeting other fiber enthusiasts, right? And getting to know them and getting to know what inspires them and bouncing ideas of each other. And like, so you are the same way in this respect, like you meeting people and you coming up with new and new ideas for your magazine and new connections.
Yeah. And it's so inspiring, because I think another thing that I had in mind with what I wanted in the contents of it were inspiring stories. I love hearing where people have come from and how they got to where they are now. And most people's stories are difficult. They've made choices. They have not been easy. Right. They face challenges. The hearing those stories and sharing them, I just find it so utterly inspiring. And I suppose I always want to be able to tell the stories in such a way as they're accessible, because a lot of, I'm generalizing, but you could say art, where I've found maybe the language dense or inaccessible, and where this is about encouraging creativity, sharing stories, and for me, it's just so inspiring on so many different levels.
Well, can you write a story about yourself? Because to me, you are inspiring. If you think about it, you had 30-year career in banking, and then suddenly you're starting at the time when people think, that's it, life is over, I've done what I've done. You are starting brand new career, and look how excited you are about all this that is about to come, right? To me, this is inspiring.
Yeah, actually, I started, I think I've put out 3 newsletters so far. And yes, there needs to be a 4th very soon. And I started telling the story of how I came up with this, but I very quickly found an excuse to write about something else. You're probably right, actually. Yeah, maybe I'll get somebody else to write it for me.
No, we're living in the world where, we're living in the world of social media, TikTok, dancing videos, and suddenly, like, if you are not 20-year-old, you're feeling like your chances are gone, right? And I think it's very important to remind people that you can start something new, and you can find new passions and new interests, and you can always learn something new. Like you and I are learning about the breeds of sheep and the producers and the history of tartan. Let's talk about tartan. I found that article so interesting because you talked about connection of Scotland and New Zealand, and how there is a lot of Scottish people who, because of the colonization, came to New Zealand, but how the cultures got mixed with Maori. Tell me about this article, like what inspired you to get that in your magazine?
Well, it was actually, it was because of that 200th anniversary of George IV's visit to Edinburgh. So there was a series of cultural events in Scotland in 2022. And actually one of them was in Stirling at the Smith Museum and Gallery. And it was actually through the lady who's, she's a senior lecturer. Anyway, a very experienced academic at Edinburgh University, who who knows one of the curators at this Smith Art Gallery, and they were talking. They were just chatting, and when Katrina mentioned about the magazine, and that actually my sister, who was a colleague of Katrina, so this is so many connections into, was writing about the history of tartan. There's a connection, and when she suggested this, because I had originally asked Heather Cabell it is, to if she would, because of what Sterling were doing about the 200th anniversary, would write about the history of this. There's the weavers around Stirling and Bannockburn. Actually, they were the owners of Bannockburn House at one point. The Wilson family. We've got quite an archive of tartan fabric, which is there's some photographs of it in issue 2 as well. But actually, how that really came about was the daftest thing. It was because Katrina, one of her many talents is generating titles for articles.
That's a rare skill. That's probably like one of the most difficult things to come up with catchy title.
Well, who knew? And it's so important, isn't it? Right. So she's particularly involved because I just now rely on her for that. I hope she doesn't mind. And it was my sister, who's a professor of art history at Edinburgh University, who writes. So she's Carol Richardson, and she writes. She's written an article in issues 1, 2, and 3. Although I don't think she'll be writing one in issue 4. She gets a break. Lucky her. But it's because they know each other, and they really helped me with that network, because I had no idea about that activity.
Well, the only thing I knew it from 2 different sources, right? One was Grant Mackey, who I told you about, and he is a beautiful soul and a brilliant fiber artist from New Zealand, and he is part Scottish, part Maori, and he was telling me about the whole tartan fabric and how it belongs to different clans, have different designs of that fabric, which I find absolutely fascinating, that you can tell what clan it belongs to just looking at the colors and the stripes and all that stuff. And the second, of course, is Outlanders, which is a huge fan of Outlanders.
It's wonderful,
read it multiple times. I watched it multiple times. Jamie. So do you think like the shows like Outlander, the books like Outlander, popularize Scottish textiles and bring more attention to it?
Yes, yeah, and actually I've not read the books, but my sister has, and watched the series. Yes, I agree with you about Jamie. Anyway, one of the observations my sister has, which obviously when you're making television, I assume, and films, they can't have all the details, and they need to do some things that are maybe a bit more popular. But in the books, it was the men who knitted.
No, they actually, in the books, Jamie taught Claire how to knit, because they were all knitting in the winters in Scotland, because they were mostly farmers, and in the winter there is like nothing much to do, so they were knitting socks. So Jamie and his nephew Ian taught Claire how to knit, because she was absolutely hopeless at that.
Yeah. Although she could obviously sew surgical sutures or whatever. Yeah, so I think when you get those sorts of historic details, whether they make it into, although it was one of the relatives that taught Claire in the television program, wasn't it? It was something anyway. I think they're wonderful, and there's been a series of patterns, hasn't there? Designs based on the garments that Claire's wearing.
Yeah, one of the shawls that Claire was wearing in, I believe it's 3rd season. It was a Shetland lace shawl with star designs in it, and Monique Boonstra redesigned that shawl, and she published that design. It's called Shetland Stars. So that's the shawl from there's literally 1 second shot there. Yeah. And she saw that, she took a snapshot of the screen, of TV screen, and then she asked the producers of the show if she can recreate that shawl, and that's what she did. So there is a design called Shetland Stars by Monique Boonstra that's replica of that shawl. But there is like there are books and books of different designs from the Outlander pattern.
Yes, I'm only aware of some of them. Although, funnily enough, or maybe not, one of the items on my list of future articles is Outlander, because there was so many hooks in different textiles. I mean, I'm relying on my sister, who is a much bigger fan even than I am, and has read the books. But there's it's wonderful because it's all, I mean, nothing wrong with a good story anyway. In fact, I love a good story. But they seem to have really been, well, inspiring. And one of the things I just learned, actually, speaking of Culloden, because that obviously is a big event in Outlander. But I was reading when I was looking into the history of linen production in Scotland for issue 3, that was one of the reasons, I understand, why there was a board of manufacturers around for quite a long time, and they were all about encouraging production, partly to keep the idle population busy and out of trouble. But this was one of it wasn't only that idea. That was one of the ideas, was to keep the disaffected clans busy by getting them involved in linen production.
Oh, interesting.
So hence there was quite a lot of activity to focus on skills and production, and even growing flax in the Highlands.
You know what? I was wondering, like, I just recently went to Sturbridge Village, which is a museum in Massachusetts where it's post-industrial revolution, and it's sort of like a living museum, right? So there are people who create fabrics, and they dye yarn, and they spin yarn. So there's like all different kinds of crafting going on there. And they have a little museum of garments. And I was telling my husband, look how white the linen is. Like, after all these years, it's like whiter than the sheets that we have today at home with bleach and all of that, right? And I'm wondering if that would be like one article I would love to read about how they were taking care of like all the laundering, because it was like different animal to launder your clothes.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yeah. So actually, that was the one part. Have you heard of bleach fields? Yeah, that was the area that they seemed to, was it the middle of the 18th century, that needed the most improvement in Scotland, and we used to send all of our linen to England and to Holland, to the Netherlands, for bleaching, and there was quite a lot of activity, which I wonder was behind them keeping the linen very white, to stop people using lime and pigeon poo, or whatever chemical it is. But they probably weren't even aware of the public health issues then. Right. But these chemicals would break down the fabric. They actually weren't good for it. And it was when, what was it, chloride of lime? It was a chemical anyway, a bleaching powder, which that was 1799 or something. Anyway, there's all these snippets of information I love, but you wonder, and it's something I need to find out about as well, you wonder whether actually households had access to that bleaching powder as well as the people who were producing the linen. And I imagine in some of the households that were able to afford the finer linen, they probably did, because they had wash houses, didn't they?
Right. Yeah. Well, I see a lot of new articles in the future. But if you're going to do the Outlander issue, you have to go to Inverness and take pictures of all the patterns there with the standing stones.
Oh, yes, that is very true. Yes.
You know what? This is one thing I would love to model.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
I'll come for that.
Wow.
It's been my all-time dream to do that.
I'm sure we could arrange something. But seriously though, it's coming up with these sorts of ideas, and it's like that. You might say something in jest and think, actually, that's a really good idea. Let's just make that happen. How do we do that?
I'll be totally a support for that. Like, I would love that. Well, let's talk about your marketing strategy. how do you promote your magazine? How was it received? What do people say? How do you convince them that they have to subscribe?
Oh, that is a very good question. Again, so I started out using Instagram and doing posts, and that's been a learning to me because that's probably my biggest weakness is marketing. Is I don't know about it, so I now understand it's a whole discipline in its own right, which of course I knew, but when you need to employ it, then
Right.
you become a lot more aware. Um, yeah, so it was mainly through has been mainly through Instagram and then yarn shows. I think I've done four. So I've done last year. Really, really lucky to be at the Bannock Yarn, that one off. I was at Perth, which is now the Scottish Yarn Festival. I was at Glasgow. Um, yeah, so people who aren't necessarily on certain social media channels come across you. Um, but the best thing, and actually I realized that, I lack confidence. It's like approaching people like yourself. It's like, who am I to approach you?
Are you kidding
But
me?
what's that? Sorry.
Are you kidding me? I was like so happy when you approached me.
Thank you. But that's just wonderful and massive learning. But I think we, as you said, we have so much in common and so much more to talk about. But it was actually a couple of students. So last year at the Perth Festival of Yarn, there was a lady there who it turned out is a lecturer in publishing at Napier University. It's one of the universities in Edinburgh. And she was there with her mother-in-law. I think her mother-in-law's Canadian, and I remember her telling us that her mother-in-law orders yarn from all over the UK and has it delivered to her son. And then when they go and visit the family in Canada, they're expected to take this suitcase of purchased yarn. Anyway, she contacted, I didn't know at the time that she was a lecturer in publishing, but she contacted me afterwards to ask if I'd be interested in some of their publishing, masters in publishing in students doing a placement with me.
Oh, that's so cool.
Oh, yeah, I mean, my first reaction was, it's just me really and wonderful freelancers. But what would they do? And well, we had a chat anyway, and I had realised out of the conversation that well, there was a particular article that there was quite a lot of background research that was required. So if somebody was interested in writing, they could do that. And then there's a lot of work around the photo shoot and particularly actually sorting the photographs afterwards and choosing the ones from 2000 that are candidates for the magazine and show off the items the best advantage. And then the third thing, which it hadn't occurred to me would be involved in publishing, was marketing. So I said, yeah, let's give it a go. And I had these two wonderful students who were interested in doing their placement with me. So I've had George Davis, who has written one of the articles in issue 3, and Erica Cucinella. I'm sure I'm saying that wrong. Never mind. She'll tell me. So George and Erica, both. So one wanted to do the writing, and then Erica wanted to help the photo shoot and the photo, or organising the photographs afterwards. But they both wanted to still look at marketing. So they have been absolutely wonderful, and it was them who, amongst other things, actually said, "What about influencers?" I'm like, I vaguely heard that term, but I actually don't know what they are. But I've watched some of your episodes before, and they just joined the dots really. And Erica, I think, sent you the initial email from me because I couldn't possibly ask them to send emails on my behalf. But Erica's like, no, let us do some work for you, all the rest of it. So
Thanks, Erica.
Yes. So it's through listening to people and learning and saying, as we were saying earlier, saying yes to everything.
Right.
And it's really paid off so far. So yeah, marketing and spreading the word.
Well, I think like one of the most brilliant decisions you've done on your part is to not only offer the hard copy of the magazine, but also offer it as an electronic download, because with the shipping, it can be a little bit expensive, like when it comes to shipping it to the States or to Canada or Australia, but like everybody can download a copy and enjoy the same quality of photography and the same quality of articles and the patterns. And actually you get more patterns in the electronic, more sizing, right? Like you said. So I think that was like a brilliant solution to do that. But guys, if you can afford to get the hard copy of this magazine, like it's such a visual pleasure, and it's such a, like, just to hold it's not like those cheap magazines where the pages are super thin. This is like real, like you feel like you're reading a book, and I cannot recommend it highly enough. Like I've been enjoying it ever since I got them. I've read probably almost every article there by now. And one of the articles that really caught my attention was about the tapestry project. The beautiful pictures there, the whole history of those tapestries. So if you were to buy this magazine, buy all copies, like go back to the first publication and go like from first issue to the next issue.
Thank you.
I really love this magazine. Thank you so much for putting it together. I think you're doing a tremendous job.
Thank you.
And I'm definitely going to be a subscriber for the future copies. I can't wait to see number 3. So number 3 is coming up really soon.
End of May, it'll be out. Yep.
So if you guys want to subscribe for it, I'll put the links. I'll put all the information in the description of this video. So you can go, you can follow the Scottish Yarns, the Journal of Scottish Yarns on Instagram, and get yourself a copy of this magazine. You will love it.
Thank you so much.
Thanks so much, Susan. I loved meeting you. I love talking to you. And I'm sure we're going to be continuing this conversation for many times in the future. I loved every minute with you. And thank you so very much for being a guest of my channel today.
Thank you. I look forward to future conversations.
Thank you.